When I first moved to Willowbrook Estates, the most pressing concern on my mind was whether my home office would have adequate lighting for my consulting calls with Fortune 500 companies. I certainly never imagined I would find myself locked in mortal combat with a woman who considered garden gnomes a threat to civilization itself. Karen Bitsworth had been the Homeowners Association president for 6 consecutive terms, a feat she accomplished through the simple strategy of making every meeting so insufferable that no one else dared run against her. She ruled our pristine suburban kingdom with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove of fake pleasantries and passive-aggressive notes printed on her personal letterhead. The trouble began 3 weeks after I had settled into my colonial-style home on Maple Lane. I had unpacked my collection of vintage garden gnomes, a quirky hobby I had developed during my years living in Europe while establishing my international business connections. These were not your average big-box store lawn ornaments. My collection included hand-carved pieces from Germany's Black Forest, artisanal ceramics from Italian craftsmen, and even a few one-of-a-kind commissioned pieces that had cost me more than most people's cars. I arranged them thoughtfully throughout my front garden, creating charming vignettes among the roses and hostas. There was Gunther the fisherman beside my small pond, Isabella the flower maiden near the peony bushes, and my crown jewel, a magnificent wizard named Merlin who stood majestically beneath my oak tree, his crystal ball catching the morning sunlight like a beacon of whimsy. It was a Tuesday morning when I first encountered Karen's wrath. I was enjoying my coffee on the front porch, reviewing quarterly reports from my overseas investments, when she came marching across my lawn like Napoleon invading Russia. She wore her standard uniform of pressed khakis and a polo shirt with the H.O.A. logo embroidered on the chest, her silver hair helmet sprayed into submission. Karen speaking in her most condescending tone, "Excuse me, but we need to discuss your lawn ornament situation immediately." According to Section 4.7 of our community guidelines, decorative garden elements must maintain the aesthetic integrity of our neighborhood. These garish little creatures are completely inappropriate for Willowbrook Estates. I set down my coffee and regarded her with the same calm demeanor I used when negotiating million-dollar contracts. "I'm sorry, but I've reviewed the HOA guidelines thoroughly, and there's no specific restriction on garden gnomes. The document mentions maintaining curb appeal, which I believe my carefully curated collection enhances rather than detracts from." Karen's eyes narrowed like a hawk spotting prey. She pulled out a leather portfolio and flipped through several laminated pages with the efficiency of a Supreme Court justice citing precedent. Karen continuing in her authoritative voice, Section 2.3 clearly states that all outdoor decorations must be pre-approved by the Architectural Review Committee. Did you submit the proper forms? I think not. These monstrosities need to be removed within 72 hours or you'll be facing fines. The next morning, I submitted the required paperwork, complete with photographs, detailed descriptions, and historical context for each piece in my collection. I even included scholarly articles about the cultural significance of garden gnomes in European folklore, thinking perhaps education might soften Karen's stance. How naive I was. 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter on official HOA letterhead. The Architectural Review Committee, which consisted entirely of Karen and her 2 closest cronies, had unanimously rejected my application. Their reasoning was delightfully vague, citing concerns about neighborhood harmony and property values. The letter concluded with a demand that I remove all gnomes within 10 days or face daily fines of $50 per violation. I decided to try the diplomatic approach first. I invited Karen for coffee, hoping to find common ground. She arrived at my door with a briefcase full of community guidelines and a sanctimonious smile that could have curdled milk. Karen speaking with false sweetness, "I'm so glad you're finally seeing reason. You know, I have nothing against garden decorations personally, but we have standards to maintain here. Property values don't maintain themselves. Perhaps you could consider some nice, tasteful planters instead? Something that fits with our community vision." I explained that my gnomes were valuable collectibles, some irreplaceable pieces of art that represented years of careful acquisition. I offered to move them to my backyard if visibility was truly the concern. Karen's response was swift and merciless. Karen with increasing aggression, "The guidelines make no distinction between front and backyards. All visible outdoor decorations fall under HOA jurisdiction. And frankly, the value you claim these things have is irrelevant. This is about community standards, not your personal investment portfolio. That afternoon, I received another certified letter. The daily fines were now in effect, and Karen had apparently conducted a comprehensive inventory of my collection. She had counted 37 individual violations, meaning I was facing $1,850 in fines per day. She had also included a helpful addendum noting that continued noncompliance could result in legal action and potential liens against my property. For 3 days, I paid the fines while researching my options. My legal team, the same firm that handled my international business acquisitions, assured me that fighting the HOA in court was possible but would be expensive and time-consuming. They suggested that removing the gnomes might be the most practical solution. But Karen had made a crucial error in judgment. She had assumed I was just another suburban homeowner who would cave to her pressure tactics. She had no idea that my personal investment portfolio she had so dismissively mentioned included controlling interests in several multinational corporations, or that my consulting work involved restructuring entire industries. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning. I woke to find Gunther missing from his spot by the pond. Then I noticed Isabella was gone from the peony bushes. A systematic search revealed that 12 of my most valuable pieces had vanished overnight, including my beloved Merlin. I immediately called the police, but Officer Martinez who responded seemed less than enthusiastic about investigating missing garden gnomes. He dutifully filled out a report but made it clear that unless I had security footage of the theft, recovery was unlikely. That's when Mrs. Henderson from next door approached me with information that changed everything. She was a sweet elderly widow who spent her mornings tending her prize-winning rose garden and her evenings watching Netflix crime documentaries. She had developed quite the observational skills. Mrs. Henderson speaking in a conspiratorial whisper, "I saw Karen sneaking around your yard at 5 in the morning with a large bag. She made 3 trips to her car, and I could swear I saw something that looked like Merlin's pointy hat sticking out of that bag. I've been documenting everything in my garden journal because that woman has been terrorizing this neighborhood for years." Mrs. Henderson handed me a composition notebook filled with meticulous entries detailing Karen's various power trips and rule violations. It was like reading the field notes of a naturalist studying a particularly aggressive species of suburban dictator. Armed with this evidence, I confronted Karen directly. She answered her door wearing an expression of such theatrical innocence that it belonged on a soap opera. Behind her, I could see what appeared to be the edge of Gunther's fishing rod poking out from behind her living room curtains. Karen with exaggerated surprise, "Missing gnomes? How terrible. You know, these thefts are exactly why we have community standards. Valuable items left outside are just inviting criminal activity. Perhaps if you had followed the guidelines from the beginning, this unfortunate situation could have been avoided." When I mentioned Mrs. Henderson's witness account, Karen's mask slipped for just a moment. I saw a flash of panic before she recovered her composure. Karen with forced confidence, "That old woman spends too much time reading mystery novels. Her imagination gets the better of her. I'm sure your little decorations will turn up eventually. These things usually do." The police were equally unhelpful when presented with Mrs. Henderson's testimony. Without physical evidence or security footage, they considered it a civil matter. Karen had calculated correctly that the legal system would be too slow and expensive for most people to pursue justice over garden ornaments. But Karen had made her second crucial miscalculation. She had stolen from someone with both the resources and the patience to play a much longer game than she had anticipated. I spent the next week making phone calls to various contacts I had cultivated during my international business career. My first call was to Heinrich Müller, a master craftsman in Bavaria who had created several pieces in my collection. The second was to my real estate attorney, who specialized in complex property acquisitions. The third was to my private investigator, a former FBI agent who owed me several favors from a corporate espionage case I had helped resolve. Within 10 days, I had a comprehensive dossier on Karen Bitsworth that would have impressed the CIA. I learned about her previous addresses, her employment history, her financial situation, and most importantly, her obsessive devotion to maintaining what she considered the perfect suburban aesthetic. More interesting was what my investigator discovered in Karen's garage during a routine neighborhood security check he conducted while she was at her weekly bridge club meeting. 37 garden gnomes of various sizes and styles were carefully arranged on shelving units, each tagged with a small index card noting their original location and date of confiscation. Karen had not destroyed my collection. She had created a twisted museum of her conquests, a private gallery of suburban victories over what she considered aesthetic rebellion. This revelation opened up possibilities I had not previously considered. My real estate attorney informed me of several interesting properties that had recently become available in our area. Most intriguing was a commercial lot directly across from Karen's house that had previously housed a small insurance office. The building had been demolished, leaving a vacant lot zoned for commercial use. I also learned that the large corner property adjacent to the H.O.A. common areas was owned by an elderly gentleman who had been trying to sell for several years. The asking price was reasonable, especially considering its strategic location and development potential. Phase 1 of my plan required a substantial investment, but money had never been a limiting factor in my endeavors. I purchased both properties through a shell corporation, ensuring the transactions would not immediately be traceable to me. The paperwork took 3 weeks to complete, during which time Karen continued her campaign of harassment through increasingly creative interpretations of H.O.A. regulations. She issued citations for my mailbox being 2 inches too far from the curb, for having more than the permitted number of different flower varieties in my garden, and for parking my car in my own driveway for more than 24 consecutive hours, which she claimed violated some obscure commercial vehicle restriction. Each citation came with Karen's sickeningly sweet notes expressing her regret about having to enforce these necessary community standards. She was clearly enjoying herself immensely, savoring what she believed was her inevitable victory over my stubborn resistance to her authority. Phase 2 began when Heinrich Müller arrived from Germany with 6 assistants and 17 large shipping crates. Heinrich was a master craftsman whose family had been creating garden sculptures for over 2 centuries. He had agreed to undertake this project partly for the substantial fee I was paying, but mostly because he was personally offended that someone had stolen his artistic creations. The shipping crates contained what Heinrich proudly called his Gnomepocalypse collection, a series of increasingly elaborate and fantastical garden gnomes that pushed the boundaries of the art form into the realm of outdoor sculpture. There were gnomes riding dragons, gnomes conducting orchestras, gnomes engaged in epic battles, and gnomes recreating famous scenes from European history. But the centerpiece was Heinrich's masterwork, a 12-foot-tall gnome king seated on a throne, surrounded by an army of life-sized gnome warriors. The entire installation was carved from black forest oak and painted with weather-resistant pigments that would maintain their vibrant colors for decades. We installed this magnificent army on my newly acquired commercial lot directly across from Karen's house. Since the property was zoned for commercial use, there were no residential H.O.A. restrictions that could apply. The city's commercial zoning laws had surprisingly liberal guidelines for outdoor artistic installations, especially when they were classified as cultural exhibitions. I submitted all the proper permits and applications, describing the installation as the Willowbrook European Folk Art Sculpture Garden and Cultural Center. The city planning department, perhaps charmed by the novelty of the project, approved everything within 2 weeks. Karen's reaction to the gnome army's appearance was everything I had hoped for and more. I watched from my front window as she stood on her perfectly manicured lawn, mouth agape, staring at 12 feet of gnome royalty that now dominated her view from every window facing the street. She marched over to my house within the hour, clutching a copy of city ordinances and looking like she was preparing for war. Karen speaking with barely controlled fury, "This is outrageous. This is harassment. There have to be regulations against this kind of visual pollution in a residential neighborhood." I invited her in for coffee and calmly explained that the installation was on commercial property, properly permitted, and fully compliant with all applicable regulations. I also mentioned that as a cultural exhibition, it qualified for certain protections under the city's public art initiatives. Karen's voice rising to near hysteria. "Cultural exhibition? These are the same ridiculous lawn ornaments you had in your yard. You can't just call something art and expect people to accept it. That's when I revealed phase 3 of my plan. I handed Karen a professionally bound document prepared by my legal team. It was a cease and desist order demanding the immediate return of my stolen property, accompanied by a comprehensive legal analysis of her actions. But more devastating was the attached inventory list. My private investigator had documented every single item in Karen's garage museum, complete with photographs and estimated replacement values. The total value of my stolen collection exceeded $47,000, officially elevating Karen's hobby from petty theft to grand larceny. I watched the color drain from Karen's face as she read through the document. She had been so focused on her petty power games that she had never considered the cumulative value of her conquests or the legal implications of her actions. Karen speaking in a much smaller voice, but these were HOA violations. I was enforcing community standards. You can't claim theft when these items were in violation of our guidelines. My attorney had anticipated this exact defense. The legal brief included a detailed analysis proving that Karen's HOA had no legal authority to confiscate private property, regardless of guideline violations. Their enforcement powers were limited to fines and legal action. Taking residents' belongings constituted theft under state law, period. But the true genius of my plan was yet to be revealed. I handed Karen a second document, this one bearing the official seal of the city planning department. It was a development proposal for my recently acquired corner property adjacent to the H.O.A. common areas. The proposal outlined plans for Gnome Village, a commercial tourist attraction featuring the world's largest collection of garden gnomes. The development would include a gift shop, a small cafe, guided tours, and educational exhibits about European folk art traditions. The centerpiece would be a recreation of a traditional German village, complete with dozens of themed garden scenes and interactive displays. Most importantly, the proposal was completely legal and had already received preliminary approval from the planning department. The corner property's commercial zoning made such development entirely permissible, and my connections with city officials had smoothed the approval process considerably. Karen stared at the documents in horror, slowly realizing the full scope of what I had orchestrated. Her beloved Willowbrook Estates, her perfect suburban kingdom, was about to become ground zero for a commercial gnome theme park that would attract tourists, tour buses, and garden gnome enthusiasts from around the world. Karen speaking in a whisper of dawning terror, "You can't be serious. This will destroy property values. This will bring noise, traffic, crowds of people. This will ruin everything we've worked to build here." I smiled and poured myself another cup of coffee, savoring the moment I had been planning for months. Karen was finally beginning to understand that her campaign against my modest garden decoration had awakened forces far beyond her ability to control or comprehend. "Actually, Karen," I said calmly, "I think you'll find that Gnome Village will be a wonderful addition to our community. Think of it as the ultimate celebration of garden gnome culture. Your private collection in the garage would make an excellent centerpiece for our museum exhibit. I'm sure you'll want to return those items voluntarily rather than face criminal charges for theft." Karen's hands were shaking as she set down the development proposal. For the first time in our entire conflict, she seemed to grasp that she was dealing with someone who possessed resources and determination that made her HOA presidency look like a children's game. The final phase of my revelation was the most satisfying. I handed Karen one last document, a purchase agreement for her house. My shell corporation had made an offer 20% above market value, contingent on a 30-day closing period. Karen barely able to form words, "You want to buy my house? But why would I sell to you?" "Oh, you don't have to sell," I replied pleasantly. "But I thought you might want to relocate before the construction begins. Gnome Village will be operating 7 days a week, with extended hours during peak tourist season. The parking lot will accommodate tour buses, and we're planning special events like the annual International Gnome Festival. I imagine the noise and traffic might be a bit overwhelming for someone who values peace and quiet." I watched as the full magnitude of my counterattack finally penetrated Karen's consciousness. She had stolen my garden gnomes to enforce her vision of suburban perfection, and in response, I was about to transform her entire neighborhood into a commercial celebration of the very thing she despised most. Her precious HOA guidelines that she had wielded like weapons would be powerless against properly zoned commercial development. Her years of terrorizing neighbors over minor aesthetic infractions were about to be overshadowed by a 12-foot gnome king visible from space. Karen stood up slowly, clutching the documents against her chest like armor that could no longer protect her. Her carefully constructed world of suburban control was crumbling around her, and she was powerless to stop the avalanche she had triggered with her petty theft and vindictive enforcement of meaningless rules. Karen, speaking in complete shock and defeat, "You planned all of this. The theft, the legal action, buying the properties, the development proposal. This was all revenge for garden gnomes." "Not revenge, Karen," I corrected gently. "Justice. You stole my property and tried to use bureaucratic bullying to force me into compliance with your personal aesthetic preferences. I simply decided to show you what real power looks like when it's properly applied. Gnome Village opens in 6 months, assuming you return my stolen collection within the next 72 hours. Karen's face had gone completely white as she stared at me with the dawning realization that she had picked a fight with someone who operated on a completely different level than her small-minded HOA politics. The woman who had spent years terrorizing neighbors over mailbox heights and flower varieties was about to become the unwilling neighbor to the world's largest garden gnome theme park, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop it.